You're listening to Achtung Millwall, broadcasting from the beautiful South Bermondsey. Accept no substitute.
Good morning, dear listeners. Welcome to Achtung Millwall. Joining me to consider the sad passing this week of a Millwall mainstay of the 1960s side is our club historian, the unofficial club historian. It's Mr. Neil Fissler. How you doing, Neil?
There you go, mate. I don't think Dave Sullivan would like me having that unofficial. Yeah, well, I'm just a history blagger.
Perhaps number two in the hit parade of Millwall club historians.
Not even 3 or 4, to be honest, because you've actually got Richard Lindsay, Ted Wilding. But I'm not sure what Chris Bethel describes himself as, but.
I put myself in the National League conference compared with the Premier League in that company, Neil. But purpose of today's show, primarily, listeners, is to consider the sad news this week of a club mainstay of the 1960s, Bryan Snowdon, who passed away this week. A huge figure in the unbeaten run sides and the promotion sides of the 64 and 65, I think it was, Neil. Major figure of the time, wasn't he, Bryan?
Absolutely, and I think it's a team that doesn't get the credit that it deserves. I know that it'll get a lot of credit off the older generation, and I mean older than me, people that are old enough to remember that side. But the younger generation, I don't think will quite appreciate what a great side that was. Going from Division 4, we're in the basement of the Football League, Division 4, a promotion, then a back-to-back promotion, 59 home games unbeaten until they lost it to my local team down here.
Yeah.
It was quite some achievement, and at a time when Millwall had fluctuated. We hadn't had much success after World War II, had we?
No.
And to be quite honest, we'd struggled for a number of years. And then things started to look up for a little while, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, a number of great managers. I mean, I'm just looking at the sequence, as Neil has said there, promotion from the bottom tier. This was 1964-65. Bryan Snowdon was a centre half, so he was the rock in some ways upon which the defence was built. But to be promoted from Division 4, as it used to be, then into the second division the season after, from the third tier, we've got Ron Gray, Billy Gray, Benny Fenton. These are big named managers of the time. And then they'd actually gone to achieve a fairly good standing in the second division in the end. I mean, but by the time that I think Bryan's period at the club came to an end, I imagine with the rise of Barry Kitchener at that time.
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, well, it was with the rise of Kitch. As soon as Kitch, they felt able was to take over, Bryan Snowdon was pushed out. But if you look at that back 4, or back 5, actually, if you want to include it, you've actually had Tommy Wilson,
Yeah,
Harry Cripps,
yeah,
Johnny Gilchrist,
yeah,
Bryan Snowdon, fantastic players, and then they had a certain Alex Stepney.
yes. Not bad goalkeeper, not a bad back line, in all honesty. And as we've said, I mean, this team, this defence primarily, because I think all of the managers were not attack minded in the modern sense. It was built on good defence, and then you played your football from there onwards. Back in those times, I think one of the, just thinking about your opening point there, Neil, about it, this is a side that doesn't get the credit that it deserves. I suppose one of the reasons, maybe, I don't know, but it was probably in the very early days of televised football. You didn't get an awful lot of TV coverage, particularly of the lower tiers back then. So there just isn't that much footage around. You get the odd bits and pieces here and there, but unfortunately, we live in an era, unless you can see it, it's quite hard to think it. And this side just predated that bigger 1970s era, if you want, late 60s, early 70s, when TV really came into its own. So I think that's part of the reason. But to finish in 8th position in the second division from playing 4th division football is some achievement. There's a great post from Danny Baker, actually, that was of that era. Bryan predates my time, listeners. I don't speak from any personal memory of Bryan Snowdon, only what I've read and found out about since. But Danny Baker, Neil says, Bryan Snowdon has died. He was captain of the Millwall in the 60s and a genuine proper hero of mine that never leaves you. He's got a picture of the team in training in Deptford Park on the gravel pitch there. Here he is, ball at his feet with the squad during training in Deptford Park. My team, my captain. That's quite a nice tribute by Danny. I think he speaks for a lot of people because he's very, very well thought of, Bryan Snowdon.
He is, absolutely. And what I think needs to be remembered was in that 4th division promotion winning side, he actually missed a large chunk of the season because he broke his ankle. Broke his ankle. Wow. September 64 against Chester.
Wow.
And was sent to the Miller Hospital, I was reading. I'm not sure where the Miller Hospital was,
right.
or if it was any good. It must have been a New Cross Hospital, or thereabouts.
A local,
so,
yeah.
A chunk of that season, but recovered well. That was, I take your point about television, but I think the further we get away from things, things like this do get lost in the sands of time, don't they?
They do.
Younger generation, are they interested in history? Probably not. I think it's only the likes of me and you that and a select band of others.
I hope
this that want to keep this kind of thing alive. Otherwise, I think it would die.
I know what you mean. I think sometimes, or I hope, this is my hope, when we do these shows, Neil and I hope that we do mention names and games and capture times gone by because it's not that far back. This is within my lifetime, listeners. Younger listeners that think those kinds of things, if there are any out there, I don't know, but your life also will become history at some point. It happens quite quickly. And I think to mark these club greats is important because the cliche that you keep reading online is that football didn't start in 1992. It has a long and rich depth of history, and players like Bryan Snowdon are representative of a certain type of game and certain type of player. Because when you read his life story, I'm just looking at your book here, Neil. Bryan Snowdon, centre half, 144 games for the Lions between 63 and 67. He came from Bishop Auckland, which is in the northeast. But he played his football at Mill, but largely speaking in the lower leagues. I mean, we did make the second division in the end. But he went on after football, after he gave up the game, to run a petrol station in Mepham in Kent. It smacks of a different time, doesn't it? Footballers had to go back to fairly regular jobs after the career. There wasn't the glamour and money, maybe, if that's how you see it nowadays, that it just wasn't around, was it?
No, funnily enough, I know we're going to talk about our woeful run of form at Norwich.
We have to.
Yeah. But I was looking a player up earlier on, and I don't want to diverge too much, but he was a player that played for us in 1908. A guy called Billy Hunter.
Right.
And he emigrated to America and became a petrol pump attendant.
That's a long way to go to man a petrol station.
Basically, yeah. So it shows that I was reading on Facebook earlier on about a Yeovil player and who quite a big name Yeovil player for them, but actually went to work for the local employer, which was the Westland Helicopter Factory.
Yeah, down the West Country, yeah.
So a lot of these people back then, they did extraordinary jobs, running a petrol station with Len Julian's.
Yeah.
No less. So Yeah, it was a different time. It was a different era, and they didn't earn Neymar types of £2 million a week, whatever he's picking up for.
God knows, he's being overpaid, whatever he's doing. But I suppose you command a market in the end, Neil, and I suppose you get paid what the market will allow. But Bryan Snowdon, this is a wonderful picture that Danny Baker's put online. It's got that kind of 60s washed out, grainy kind of colour to it in Deptford Park, playing on a gravel pitch. It's like kicking a ball around in your school playground, Neil, isn't it? You know, God knows how professionals trained on it. They did, clearly. There's Bryan in the centre with the ball at his feet, as Baker says here. An interesting career. I mean, it came to us via Blackpool and Portsmouth, and then joined Millwall for £6,000 in 1963. There's a sum of money for your younger listeners, £6,000. After his Lions career, which would include the record-breaking 59 games unbeaten at home, which was an immense achievement. The only way I can ever describe that, really, now, the more you look at it, the more I don't like the word awesome, but it's probably the best one I've got at the moment. More awesome it becomes is when you consider the only team to break it was the Liverpool side of the early 80s, which is debatably one of the greatest club sides of all time. You know, it would certainly be in the conversation. And it took them to take away a record constructed by Millwall at the end of Coldblow Lane. It's quite an achievement when you think to be part of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just a shame that we couldn't get our away form together, really.
I think I'd give my right arm for that approach now, to be really honest, but there we are. That's a different subject.
Yeah, well, no, we were talking at the weekend, me, you and H, weren't we?
Yeah, same point.
3 wins in 15.
It's a bit different.
Yeah, well, these guys played unbeaten in 59. It was
3 years, and that included the promotion season, unbeaten at Coldblow Lane. And as Neil has said, it took, in the end, Division 2 football, Plymouth Argyle, in the end, as it had to in the end. The team puts one too many past you, and that was the end of it. But a magnificent run, which stayed in the record books until the early 80s, when, as I say, Liverpool finally took it away. And this was a magnificent Liverpool side, so it took that much to get it off of us.
I think what they said about Bryan Snowdon was he was actually a Millwall fan almost until the end. He was an enthusiastic attendee of games at the Den.
Right, okay. I didn't know that.
Always attended Dockers Day.
Right.
When the ex-boys got together, and he was quite often at the centre of things, chatting to everybody and reminiscing. These kind of people, they're dying out, aren't they? I got a message off Brian King last night, sending me a picture of Gordon Bollens.
Yeah, 1970s striker, early late 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was his 80th birthday either yesterday or the day before, and he's now sadly suffering from dementia. Apparently, so
is he?
Yeah. So it's great that these players are still in touch with the club, and they're all fantastic guys. You get to speak to them. There's no airs and graces. I'm not sure if Zian Fleming gives anybody the time of day in the car park afterwards, or Tyler Bury, or people like that.
I think, in fairness, Zian does, but Tyler, I don't know. He's gone now. He's gone to Denmark this morning, listeners. So
yeah, but
I know what you mean. It's a different sense.
Yeah, well, how accessible will these people be in 40, 50 years' time?
I think we often call ourselves a working class club, Neil, and I think the players. I mean, I'd say this for football generally, mate. I think this is obviously a Millwall show, so we look at the world through our own glasses. But there is a real sense of working class life of the 50s and 60s when you talk about these kinds of players. It would go on. It actually had a little spell. This is one I wanted to pick out for listeners. It was actually part of the very first attempt to plant soccer in the USA. He played for the Detroit Cougars in the mid-60s, 1967 to January 68, played in Detroit, which was an attempt to try to transplant English and Scottish, I think some Irish players, as club sides into a North American soccer league, which didn't quite take off. It was a one-off experiment to transplant a whole side. I think Wolves did this, but he was part of the Detroit Cougars, which I think were primarily, I stand to be corrected, they're primarily Hibernians and Heart players, I think, over there. So an interesting career. He would become a PE teacher after football, and then, as we've said, would run the Whitehall service station which is in Mepham, alongside his former teammate Len Julians. Bryan Snowdon, Neil, 144 games, no goals, defender, 1935 to 2023. Rest in peace, Bryan Snowdon. A great club.
There's something I'd quite like to flag up. There was another player that died recently, Jack Elliott,
Right.
who made 2 appearances on outside right. Joined us in November '46, so straight after World War II. He was actually working in the solicitor's office.
Right.
And Jack Hock,
Right.
very famous name from back in time,
Absolutely.
impressed him in a trial match at Bath. You weren't signed back then. You had to play a trial match. And sometimes you could be unfortunate and the trial match would take place in the first team.
And you had to go down to Bath to get your game as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So he died. He died 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think.
Jack Elliott. I missed that one. So rest in peace, Jack Elliott. I'm just looking, just before we close completely, on Bryan Snowdon here, that I've found a piece from, he would play at Margate in his post-Millwall career, listeners. And this is from Margate Club History site, margatefootballclubhistory.com.
Fantastic site.
Is it? It's a nice piece on him, actually, but there's just one quote which I wanted to get in before we close on Bryan. I think it sums up the kind of player that he was. And if you want a line that sums up the kind of player that Millwall fans want to watch generally, every player should read this. They say here that Bryan Snowdon, his solid tackling led the local press to comment that he gives and asks for no quarter. And if you want a Millwall club slogan for every player should have tattooed on their arm. They're big on tats now, aren't they? Write that one on there. You give and ask for no quarter. And I think that's a nice way to close a little tribute to Bryan Snowdon. Rest in peace.
Achtung, Millwall.
Neil, we have a game against Norwich on Saturday. And we have one of the poorest records at Carrow Road.
When you turn up on Saturday, you're going to have a bit of a wait. It's Sunday.
Sunday, it's a TV game, isn't it? Sunday, listeners, don't ignore me on matters of detail. We've got a very poor record at Carrow Road. It's never been a happy hunting ground for us. And in fact, I've dug out 2 fixtures here for us just to illustrate said point. The last time we won there, which was in 1968, which I think was the year of your birth, Neil. It was the year that gave us Neil Fissler.
Mate, I was actually born 11 days after this game. This game, I think, on the 2nd of November, and I popped out on the 13th of November.
Well, we're going to come back to that. That's the last time we won in Norwich, and that was in November the 3rd, 1968. I've got a press report to come back to on that front. But Neil, I wanted when I do these little shows, I try and find a fixture approximately at the same time of year. I don't know how long I can keep this going for. I don't know, listeners, but I found a result 1-1, a rare point for us in Norwich. I don't know why it's such a fearsome location for us to go to. It's actually quite a pleasant town, I always think, Norwich. It was a 1-1 draw. This was dated the 25th of August 1923, Norwich City v Millwall. And I've dug this one out just to have a quick look at because, just purely because it's the closest that I could find to the actual day of Sunday's fixture. And I've got a report here. This is from the Weekly Dispatch, a long-gone newspaper, London newspaper, dated the 26th of August. Looks like it might have been a Sunday paper. Norwich won. Millwall Athletic. They're still calling us Millwall Athletic. This would have been 2 years after we joined the Third Division South of the Football League from the previous Southern League years. But the Weekly Dispatch says that Norwich City were rather fortunate in sharing the points and the 2 goals with Millwall. The latter's inside forwards shot badly during the opening stages. There's nothing new in this life, listeners. But for this weakness, Morris would have credited Millwall the first goal of the match. As it was, this distinction fell to Dennison. I think he's a Norwich player, who shot through after a corner kick. Morris equalised 8 minutes later after the change of ends and subsequently made several fine efforts to put Millwall in front. In the last minute of the game, though, Norwich hit the bar and the post. Millwall played the better football than Norwich, but the standard was never high. The forwards seldom working together. That's probably the sum of it. Norwich City won, Millwall Athletic won. I've picked out a team from that game, and I wanted to focus on one player in particular, Harry Morris. Neil, the team for the Millwall that took the field that day at the Nest, which was Norwich City's previous stadium, a very strange looking stadium actually. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of it. It was almost hewn from not quite cliff tops, but you've got very enclosed hills around it.
It was actually a disused chalk pit.
Yeah,
and we've got to be honest, it's probably my favourite ex-football ground or football league ground, because I don't think my descriptive powers will do this ground justice. But if you can imagine where they dug out the chalk up high, they actually turned it into terracing and stands. So they had a lot of precarious looking structures.
They did.
That people would actually view the match from, and they paid to view the match from these precarious positions. But then I think it got.
It was deemed unsafe. I mean, it's well worth. You can search for this on online, listeners. Have a look at Google search the Nest Norwich, and as Neil says, I mean, it was. You often see photos, Neil, from where people have gone on ground hopping trips abroad, and they go to places like the Faroe Islands or Iceland, and you have like a pitch hewn from a mountain side. Where as the ball goes across the sideline, it's almost into a sheer face of rock, and it gives you that sense of cliff tops or cliffs all around the ground. But with angled terracing and people kind of clinging on to the most precarious looking crash barriers in odd places, it's quite a sight, well worth a look. Which is where this fixture was played. I think in the end, Norwich had to move to Carrow Road because the Nest became impractical.
It was deemed unsafe.
Safe back then.
1930s standards.
How unsafe is that when you think about it? The Millwall side that achieved the draw at Norwich. It was a 3:30 kickoff, actually. It was odd. Anyway, Crawford in goal, Jack Fault, I think, Neil, Richard Hill, I think, Archie Gom, I remember from a previous show, Harold, Amos Pither, Alf Mule, I remember his name, Morris, which is Harry Morris. I'm going to come back to Morris after we've just finished this team list, Lane and Gore. I wanted to focus on Harry Morris, if I may, Neil, because I've looked in your book, and it's an interesting character, actually. I thought it would just be worth mentioning, because this is one of the joys of doing these shows, I find, is that you find some really interesting little stories, often nestling behind names and games that you didn't expect to turn up. But Harry Morris, as he was known, was born David Hyman Morris, a Jewish player, a fairly practicing Jewish person as well. Talented. He was an inside forward, which would be, I suppose, a striker in maybe a winger in modern terms. Played 81 times for us between 1922 and 25, including this fixture at Norwich we've just mentioned. 32 goals, so he's a pretty decent inside forward, come winger, I suppose. Born in Bethnal Green in 1897, listeners. He would, interestingly, and we'll come back to this, he would die in Santa Clara, which is in California, in 1985. His career took in the Middlesex Regiment during the First World War. He served in the army. He played for a side, I've never heard of this side, the Vicar of Wakefield FC, and apparently they played on, I think it was Hackney Marshes, I read somewhere. There's a very odd named football club, Vicar of Wakefield FC.
I think you might find it was probably a pub.
A pub. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that angle. It was such a strange name, but I suppose a pub would make sense actually. So yeah, Vicar of Wakefield FC. I think we will go with pub side. I think that probably sounds a better call than my assessment. And then Fulham, Brentford, Millwall. He signed for us in 1921 for £1,200. Then on to Swansea Town, as they were called, Swindon Town, Clapton Orient, Cheltenham, and then he coached, interestingly, in Sweden at Gothenburg. The biog that Neil did in the Who's Who book, which I recommend, listeners. Harry Morris, as he was known, had excellent power in both feet and certainly boosted Millwall's goal tally after joining with 8 from 14 games and was the leading scorer in 1924 with 17 goals.
I've just had a very quick look. The Vicar of Wakefield, actually a pub at 83 Coventry Street, Bethnal Green.
Wow, that's a find. He played for a pub side then presumably after the end of the First World War. He wanted to play football, so he's played for the Vicar of Wakefield. He would also go on after football. His career took in 307 goals across 449 games with many clubs, Cheltenham, and then, as we said, he finished up in coaching in Sweden. Interesting, he finished up working for the British Embassy in Stockholm and saw diplomatic service in the USA until he retired in 1965. That's a twist. I didn't see that one coming when I read his biography. I thought that's got to be worth a mention here. And I've looked on Wikipedia as well, Neil. Just talking about Harry Morris. As we've said already, Morris was Jewish. It says that he was observant of the faith, but he would play on Saturdays during his football career and only refused to play on high holidays. These must be certain landmark, Jewish festivals.
Yeah, Hanukkah, and I guess, and things like that.
Served in the Middlesex Regiment during the First World War. He had a daughter, Estelle, who died from polio in 1930. This was a very common thing back then, unfortunately. He would work in Gothenburg at the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 and the invasion of Norway by the Germans the following year. Morris and his family remained in neutral Sweden until the end of the war. Through his job in the consulate, Harry Morris helped prisoners of war escape to the UK. The family emigrated to the USA after the war, with Harry and Edith working for the British Information Service in New York. They eventually retired in San Mateo, California, where Edith died in 1984, followed a year later by Harry. Now, I call that an interesting career. As well as all of that, he won success with Gothenburg in Swedish football, their Division II playoffs in 1939, the District Masters Capet in 1939-40 for Gothenburg, as well as the Golden Boots, the highest scorer in the 3rd Division South, 26, 27, 27, 28. What a career, what a life. And there he is mentioned in our 1-1 draw at the Nest versus Norwich City in 1923. I thought it was just such a colourful life now. I thought I had to pick him out because, as we've said already with Bryan Snowdon, these are the reasons why we do these shows, to pick out these characters, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be remembered, actually. I think Archie Gom, you mentioned, in that side, actually scored in I think our first win at the Nest, which came in 1927, a 2-0 win. Dick Parker scored the other goal.
Do check out pictures of the Nest, listeners. Well worth a look. And there we are. That's a colourful and interesting life, Harry Morris. And sometimes I'll pick a player at random. When you look deeper into their life, you find all of this stuff. It's one of the joys of doing these shows, I find, Neil. So there we are. That's the 1923 fixture. I wanted to mention, just to get in, the last time that we did actually win at Carrow Road Norwich would move in the end from the Nest to Carrow Road. And that fixture, as we've said already, occurred on the 2nd of November 1968. It was a 3-0 win for the Lions. Quite a decisive win, actually. We haven't won since at Norwich. The side that won so well that day is almost a reading of the classic Millwall side of the 60s. Brian King, John Gilchrist, Barry Kitchener, Dennis Burnett, Harry Cripps, Eamon Dunphy, George Jacks, Keith Weller, Billy Neal, Derek Posset, and Gordon Bolland, who we've mentioned already on his 80th birthday. I found a Sunday Mirror report. The Lions zipped to the top. This win at Norwich in November 68 would put us briefly top of the table. We wouldn't finish top of the table, unfortunately, that season. We'd finish in 10th position. We'd fall away in the end. But briefly, we went top. Sad Norwich lacked craft and effort, it says here. This is by Harold Mays of the Sunday Mirror. That well-known double act, Derek Posse and Keith Weller, is the primary reason why Millwall are knocking on the first division door. That's the opening paragraph, and I thought that was just a wonderful opening paragraph, because how many times have we said that across our Millwall careers, respectively, Neil? Quite a few times.
Yeah, no, we haven't. Actually, yeah, but the Norwich team that day contained Hugh Curran, who was part of our promotion winning side from
Absolutely.
when he top scored with 18 goals. It must have been a strange thing, because there won't be that many people that will be at Carrow Road, certainly in the away end on Sunday.
12 o'clock start. It's a difficult one. Yeah.
That will actually remember the last time we won there.
No, I suppose not. No, I mean, to have gone there in 68, you'd have had to have been, well, maybe a kid might have been taken there. You'd have to be at least my age, if you remember it. You probably, I mean, otherwise you're talking about adulthood, so you're talking about 70s and 80s, years old.
Funnily enough, our first win at Carrow Road, which came in front of the King George VI.
Did it? I didn't know
in October 1938.
Wow.
He was in Norwich for the ceremonial opening of the town hall.
Right. So he just thought he'd drop in and watch the football.
And popped along and dropped in and watched the first 15 minutes. A 2-0 win for Millwall with Don Barr and Tom Brolly scoring the goals. We didn't actually have that bad a record there until 68. So we won there in 48. So there wasn't a lot of football, and we didn't play there very often. We always seemed to be in a different division.
Different leagues to them, I suppose.
Jimmy Constantine and Willie Hurrell scoring in a 2-1 win. Then we won there again in 1950, which was another 2-0 victory. Stan Morgan and Chris Simmons scoring the goals. But I go back, I tried to look. I looked in Richard Lindsay's brilliant Millwall complete record.
Yeah.
To see what our record was like before the Football League. And we didn't actually play them until our first game was at their original ground, which was Newmarket Road.
Wow.
Which came before the Nest. God knows what that was like.
It'd be a field with a rope round it or something.
But they'd actually outgrown that soon afterwards, and we actually drew 1-1 there on the 31st of March 1906. This was after they'd been kicked out of the Norfolk and Suffolk League.
Right.
After being formed in 1902, they were kicked out for being professional. You couldn't go in the Norfolk and Suffolk League and
wonderful teams.
Pay your players. And our first win didn't come till 1908. We mentioned it a little bit earlier on. Billy Hunter scoring the only goal, and later coached Holland and Turkey. It ended up as a petrol pump attendant.
That's a repeat end career move to finish up running a petrol station.
And just a couple of the other games that I picked out, we won there 2-0 on Christmas Day 1911. Quinn and Wilson scoring. But then in those days, you played the following. Yeah, we played
reverse fixture. Yeah.
And we drew 0-0 at home.
Right.
1914, we won there 3-1, but Moody scoring a couple of goals. Won there in April 1920, which was just before we joined the Football League. Jimmy Broad, who later managed Barcelona, coached Barcelona.
Yeah.
Scored both goals in a 2-1 win, including the penalty. And as you say, Nick, it's been downhill ever since.
It's a 54-year-old, 53 years, isn't it? No, it's not.
55 years.
55 years since we last got any joy at Carrow. I'm just looking at the description of Posse's goal. I just love this description. This is great journalism, in my opinion. Keith Weller's long lob forward made the first goal. Posse presenting himself as a slippery eel to goalkeeper Kevin Keelan before sliding home a sweet goal. I think that's the kind of descriptive prose that I like. A slippery eel in front of the Norwich goalkeeper. He would have done it again in the 27th minute, apparently, but had Keelan not decided that pulling him down was the only means of prevention, Keith Weller stroked in the resultant penalty. Weller's 25-yard third goal on 63 minutes was slightly out of character because Keelan dived too soon and allowed the ball to pass over his body. Sounds like Kevin Keelan had a mare of a game in this particular fixture.
It sounds like Kevin Keelan. Yeah, well, actually had a George Long.
Who's also departing, apparently, for Norwich. Strangely. There we are.
Sight, people, shoot on sight. You know, what's going to happen? He's going to have an absolute blinder if he plays, isn't he?
He'll have it in for Gary Rowett, and he will try and play out of his skin, if not for every game, certainly for that one. But you just know that's going to happen. There we are. Big thank you to Neil for finding evidence that we can and have in the past done well at Norwich. If not for the last 55 years, certainly pre-First World War. Big thank you for joining me this morning, Neil.
Yeah, no problem, mate. Yeah, well, we have to break that hoodoo, don't we?
Sometime.
Yeah, well, I'm a firm believer in, well, all good things must come to an end for Norwich. And, well, they're all good things are going to be wins over Millwall.
We need a result. We need to cheer the club up after the last week we've just had. There's a general downbeat air, and I find myself caught in it as well, listeners. So a win at Norwich, if it can be done, would be a big, big dose of medicine for us all. So let's keep our fingers crossed for Sunday. I'm away next week. I'm going to try and see what the internet situation's like, where we're going down in North Devon. So if we can get a show out next week, we will do. If not, it'll be after the next game, which is Stoke at home. Be up on the Sunday, probably after the Stoke game. We'll see how the internet shapes up, Neil, down at North Devon. Until then, big thank you, Neil Fisler. Thank you for joining me today, mate.
Yeah, no problem, mate. No problem at all.
Thank you to you too, dear listeners, and thank you to everyone for listening. We've just paid 230, I think it was, over to the Lions Food Hub. This is what we do. This is why we do the show. Money we make from the adverts you have to listen to gets paid to charity, and I can't think of a better charity than Kelly and the magnificent Lion Food Hub. So big thank you to you too for listening, because that's what generates the money. To the next edition of Achtung Millwall. Thank you for listening. Arrivederci Millwall. Bye for now.
You're listening to Achtung Millwall.